everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Cinema Crusaders. I apologize that we are off schedule a little bit, but yours truly was recovering from something, so I'm feeling better now. We're ready to go. My co-hosts are lined up in the green room, ready to come on. But before we get to the movie we're going to be talking about and introduce my co-host, I want to give a quick shout out to a new anthology that's out there from Apes Comics UK right here. It's the NE1 World, and this is the first offering from the NE1 World, and it is the Perspectives Anthology. It's available now on Kindle on Amazon. It's coming out in print in a couple weeks, and this is a great sci-fi and fantasy stories. I've got a story in there. Also, Shadewing, who'll be on here today, has a story in there. Jeff Bracey, who you've seen on other stuff, is on there. Lance, who is going to be with us today, is doing stuff with NE1 World as well. But this anthology is really wonderful, and it's helping a great cause. All proceeds are going to the Dyspraxia Foundation of the United Kingdom. So, go ahead and check it out. Pick it up, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So that said, let's get right into the show. So today's show is a very interesting one. It's one we've all been looking forward to. We're going to be talking about Planet of the Apes, the 1968 version. Charlton Heston, Roddy McDowall, Kim Hunter. This is a really interesting movie. It was interesting to go back and watch this. I'm really looking forward to talking about this. So without further ado, I want to introduce my co-host for today's show. Like I said, this next man, he writes comics. Omen Comics. He's got stuff out right now. He's had story out in Perspectives is coming out as well. None other than Steve Sellers, Shadewing. How you doing, Steve?
Doing really great. I'm actually really looking forward to talking about this movie. I'm a huge fan of Rod Serling, and he was one of the people that was instrumental in writing the script. He was certainly involved in the twist ending that we all know from this movie. And it's really going to be great to see, to what extent he was involved, and also to what extent they changed what his intention was with this movie. So it'll all be great to discuss all that.
Definitely. Next, I want to introduce my another co-host. We've got him. He's on Awesome Sauce Radio on Tuesday nights. He is none other than the comic pimp. You know him, you love him, Blind Adam. How you doing, Adam?
Hey, I am doing well. If you hear any planes in the background, I apologize. My town's air show is going on, and for some reason, they want to fly right over my freaking house.
Yeah, I get a few around here as well. So
yeah. But as of this week, Awesome Sauce Radio is now on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. No longer Tuesday nights.
Cool. Hey, we know what it is. You're a national security threat. They're looking for you. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm a security threat.
Yeah. So
maybe that's the most prepared man in comic book entertainment. That could be possible. I also cannot wait to talk about the Rob Serling stuff, as he's one of my childhood heroes.
Everybody tune into that window and watch for the breaking and entering there from government agents, so we'll watch that with interest. So hopefully not. And then my next guest, you know him, you love him. He's an award-winning filmmaker. I know that he just won an award at Las Vegas. I don't remember the name of the film festival, so I'm going to have Lance shout out to that, but all props to him. He's killing it with Warehouse 9 Productions. And he also is doing stuff with NE1 World on ASAP Comics, and he is part of our Comic Crusaders team and our Cinema Crusaders team. None other than Lance Lucero.
New notification from Google Chrome.
Hey, howdy. How are you?
Hey.
Attachment www.facebook.
I guess you're getting monitored. What is that?
Yeah. So, hey, I want to real quick give yourself a pat on the back, man. You killed it in Vegas there. I saw you.
Yeah, we did pretty well at the Action on Film Fest 2020, which was delayed from last year, and Action on Film Fest 2021 with the Unmentionables, and Miracle Makers Film Fest 2021 with the Unmentionables again. So we collected 2 awards out there, and it was quite a spectacle. We really made a splash. Everybody's loving westerns, man. I don't know what's up. They're loving them.
So of course you're going to the animated wigs and everything else with, your next film, which I'm really looking forward to because it ties into one of my favorite comic books, which is Bob. But so I can't wait to see that too.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're working pretty hard on that one. So, we had the brief conversation about Terry Gilliam a minute ago, and this is kind of a big inspiration. So we're doing it all old school. It's going to be fun.
Terry Gilliam's a legend, so but that goes without saying. And I'm sure we'll cover a Terry Gilliam film sometime. Maybe if we take enough recreational drugs, we can cover Brazil sometime. So.
Oh yeah.
So, all right. So without further ado, let's get into this film. As always, Cinema Crusaders, we examine films that are at least 10 years old. Always in the back of our mind, we're trying to evaluate the film on how it would translate to modern audiences, but we want to try and introduce modern audiences to these classic films and relook at them and talk about on second viewing, or maybe for some of us 10th, 20th, 30th viewing, how we feel about the film now. So this one is Planet of the Apes 1968, and this was the first Planet of the Apes movie in what has been, who knows how many Planet of the Apes movies there's been. I've lost track count. But it's an adaptation of a 1963 book by French author Pierre Boulle. And I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit the differences between the book and the film. But this movie has another all-star cast. Obviously, everybody knows the scenes with Charlton Heston. But you had Roddy McDowall, who is an incredible talent, especially in the 60s and 70s. You also had Kim Hunter, who was in it. And then you had a bunch of notable talents who may not be as well known to modern audiences and hidden behind the ape makeup. You couldn't really tell. But if you saw their pictures, you would recognize them from various films and TV at the time as well. This film is a cult classic. It started the whole Planet of the Apes, and there were numerous Planet of the Apes spin-offs from this film, sequels. And then, of course, we had a Planet of the Apes movie later with Mark Wahlberg, which then spawned Rise of the Planet of the Apes with James Franco and those movies. And so that is what more modern audiences are familiar with. And, hey, Adam, do you think you can mute your mic until you talk because of the...
Yeah. There you go.
Cool. Thank you. So without further ado, let's get right into this. And usually what we do is we start off with talking about the cinematography. We talk about the plot of the film. We talk about the cast. We talk about how it translates to modern audiences. Then we give a score. What I would like my co-host to do on this film is try and keep in mind the whole time everything we talk about, try and contrast it or compare it to how it would to modern films and how it would translate to modern audiences. So cinematography, the performances and everything, because I think there's a real striking difference between what you see in this film and what you see in modern movies. So real quick, for those who aren't familiar with Planet of the Apes, the basic plot of the film is that astronauts return. They think they're going on to to another planet. They land on the planet. Initially, they find that it's lifeless. They travel and then find a bunch of feral humans, and they're eventually captured. And then it turns out that it's an ape society, and we're being bombed by the air show. And it's an ape society, and the humans the humans can't speak, but the apes have developed a whole society and culture and religion, and a lot of it is centered around ape supremacy. And we come to find out eventually towards the end of the film, without going into too much detail, that they are on Earth, and it's implied that there was a nuclear war and that human civilization collapsed and the ape civilization rose, and that apes are always on the lookout and trying to keep humans down because of the savage nature of man. I think that's a pretty good description. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's jump right into this, and I want to start with cinematography because I think and the pacing of the film, the look of the film. I want to talk about the special effects and the makeup and everything. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off here. One of the things that really I noticed in this movie, and I think from a modern audience's perspective, is that this movie is definitely grounded in the 60s. And the 60s like to tell movies through images. So they would give you long swaths of movie with no dialogue, showing the actors actually physically traveling. And I couldn't find out if this was all on location or if this was in sound stages. But whatever it was, you get lots of long shots of different locations, people walking, they're dealing with the terrain and things like that. And I think that this would be difficult for modern audiences because most modern audiences we have attention deficit disorder. You know, it's like if you give people, don't visually stimulate them and give them action on the screen nonstop, people get bored, you know, and I think that's unfortunate. Also, you look at the makeup, and the makeup was wonderful for the time, what they did. And it was incredibly difficult for the actors to do their acting performances through this makeup because they couldn't really emote and everything. And so I'm kind of curious. I want to hear from my co-hosts what they feel. I'm interested to know with modern makeup how that would change this film, and versus, you know, and then CGI. You know, would it be better? This movie be better with CGI or more modern makeup and prosthetics? Or does the fact that that minimal, you know, not minimalist, that old approach to makeup, it's almost like a theater, a stage makeup type thing, works better for the way that the film goes. So I'm going to kick it right over to Lance, and I want to hear your thoughts on the cinematography, the production value of the film.
Well, it's top notch, you know, especially for its time. And when you think about how no CGI, it's all optics. It is, it's pure cinema. We're out on location at Lake Powell in the desert. You know, there's no CGI, there's no fake backgrounds, there's no, you know, Mandalorian touch to it. I mean, you have your actors in spacesuits jumping into real lakes, baking in the sun for real. I mean, there's something to be said for method acting, but this definitely will help a performance, getting people out in the desert. All the locations that were owned by the studio they owned all that farmland. So all the exteriors, they had free reign to do what they wanted. And that's a filmmaker's dream right there. When you have no restrictions and you can shoot everything on location, that's the dream. Plus, going interiors, that's the only soundstage stuff that's in the movie. The laboratories, the offices, everything else was shot on location in natural daylight. It looks great. They had a lot of lighting to do with it because, of course, the film speeds were different back then. But that's what makes the image so beautiful. Those gigantic landscapes of Lake Powell are sweeping at the beginning. And that's when nothing existed. They just opened the dam up, I think, like a year before that and flooded that lake. I mean, it was still pretty primitive. So they picked a great location to do that in. And that takes guts. That takes a really trained professional crew to be out there to capture those images. It's just not throwing a camera on your shoulder or a video and saying, okay, I'm going to capture these images. This was difficult to do. And it's a case study on, you know, if you were going to do a film, do it like the Planet of the Apes. Because if you really think about it, practically the whole movie is in daylight. We don't have any night shots. You know, and that was a production thing. That was okay. You know, we got to do this during the day. We can't do night shoots because it would be too difficult. And I can probably see photographically how it would be, especially photographing the apes, to be able to light them correctly without making them look blue or purple. They did an amazing job on this film back then. And it wasn't like a gigantic budgeted film. You know, it was still right on the edge of low budget, even with the Charlton Heston in it. I mean, it's profound how they pulled it off. And I think it was genius how they kind of de-evolved the movie itself from the book. The book is like based in the 50s of our 50s with cities and machineries. I loved how they broke it down to like a 19th century Old West type. I think that was a genius stroke. I think that really set the movie apart from the book. I mean, the movie, I think, rivals the book. The conversation is, the book's always better. But in this case, I think we got a film that rivals it in many different ways because of the talent involved. Cinematically, it's gigantic. I've equated 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as like the Star Wars of the 50s. Then you have the Planet of the Apes 68, which is the Star Wars of the 60s. 20,000 Leagues, the 50s, excuse me. But you can see how profound it was because it set off what everybody expected after the fact. Merchandising, TV shows, cartoons, toys, posters, everything. Planet of the Apes, it was that movie that set precedence. It wasn't Star Wars, it was Planet of the Apes.
See, that's interesting. I do want to talk about the theme or the general, the overall arc of the movie versus the book in a separate section, but I think that's interesting what you said. Because I kind of have the opposite, but I like both, but I prefer the book, and so I'm curious to talk about that later. So
yeah, cool. But yeah, all in all, I mean, it's a top-notch film. That it's of course it's over 50 years old. You're going to have differences in technologies and what have you versus today, makeup, optics, which is now digital. But this is a case study. This is a movie that I think if you want to be a filmmaker, you study this movie because it's something that is how they pulled it off was unprecedented.
See, now I agree with that, but one of the things I found rewatching the film was that I found the pacing was very slow compared to what I'm used to now. So maybe I have changed because of what I'm used to seeing in film now, and I think that's a distinct possibility. Because I was watching these long shots of the trout, the trek from Lake Powell to when they get and encounter the apes and then the hunt and everything. And I was kind of like, at certain points, I was kind of like, okay, move it along. But at the same time, I very much appreciated and understood, especially knowing now that it was all outside, how difficult that was. I'm wondering, how, there were a couple scenes where they came down very steep cliff or hills and stuff. It's like, if you have to do another shot of that, as an actor, I'd be like, oh my God, how do I get back up there and do this again? So
it's I think that once again, modern audiences, in a sense, you're right, their attention span has been destroyed because the development of the story is key, and how you go from astronauts to feral humans and then to an ape society, I think was very well paced because it keeps people at least going. It's like, okay, what's going to happen next? Whereas if you do it so fast, it's just a matter of just cutting. It's just you're cutting a film up to get to nowhere. Whereas this, it gives you the time to develop. And we get those great conversations with the space crew, talking about morality and talking about hopefully there's a better thing out there in space besides humans. I mean, I think that development is a driving force. Their arrogance until they're shut down by, okay, this is what's better than you now. Genius stroke in my mind. Genius stroke.
Well, I think that's definitely part of the theme, and we'll hit on that, I think, because this is definitely a movie of its time. You could compare this favorably to Twilight Zone in that it has a definite message. Everything they talk about is almost philosophical, and I think a lot of that is Serling as well. So I'm going to kick it over next to Blind Adam. What did you think? Because you're going to have a different perspective on this, I know, because this movie is not in descriptive audio and you are visually impaired. So when you have these long scenes where there's no dialogue,
this is a very difficult movie.
Mm-hmm.
I almost debated whether or not to come on just because of the pacing of it and how much how much time I had to figure out what the hell's going on. To figure out, the plot of this movie at certain points.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have really gained from your commentary on this is that these movies, I think, are treasures that people need to be able to experience, but we need to make them available to wider audiences. So I think that it would be in the studio's best interest if they release a re-release of these older films, to do that descriptive audio for the visually impaired, because I think that it brings something. And what you've told me about the descriptive audio, you would be able to feel that trek that they're going on instead of having 5 minutes of nothing but soundtrack.
Yeah, and the thing I do like is how philosophical this movie is. It does have a Twilight Zone vibe to it, as far as disguising something in science fiction to talk about philosophy and the state of humanity and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think once again, I want to do its own section for that, but I think that
okay, fair enough.
Science fiction in the 60s was different than science fiction now. We have some science fiction movies that tackle philosophical concepts, but most of the time now it's visual eye candy a lot of the time. I think that's fair to say. So,
yeah. Definitely. And I also agree with Steve about the merchandising thing. Planet of the Apes did kick it off.
Cool. Definitely. Although I didn't even know Planet of the Apes merchandise was a thing until I watched Big Bang Theory. So, that's how isolated I was for a long amount of time. So,
I was all made aware of it through a documentary that came out a while back on Planet of the Apes.
Cool. Steve, what are your thoughts on the production of the film?
Okay, I'll just kind of build on some of the stuff that Lance has been saying, but I'm going to talk mainly about how the story changed and how that affected the budget and how that affected the look of the film and the way it was shot. Serling's original draft was originally slower than this, but it was also much more expensive than this, because his original plan was to have everything be done like in a modern city, with a lot of modern technology, and it wasn't with horses and basically in huts and all of this that we saw. Although I think that really is a much better look of the film, but I'll get into that. It would have been hugely expensive to make because the original script had the ape hunters showing up in helicopters and jeeps. There was originally a space lander that the astronauts were using to get there. That would have cost a lot of money. They had the cave towards the end be a nuclear bunker. All of these things would have cost a lot of money to produce. And so I am guessing what happened was that the script was basically thrown out because they knew that there was no way that they could afford this. And so they decided to, basically pare it down for practicality concerns. But this was a time in the 60s when they improvised like that and they did it all with practical effects, not with CGI like would have been done today. They usually found creative ways that made the film better, look better, and seem more interesting. And I think they did that here for sure. The whole business about everything being a daylight shot, you would never see that today. I have to completely agree with Lance on that. If it were done today, we would have had CGI and everything would have been dark. The colors would have been muted and it would not have been nearly the same film. I think the fact that everything is in daylight, makes all the scenes look more primal. It looks more prehistoric in a sense. And I think it really fits the themes a lot better than it would have been, basically trying to do it the Zack Snyder sort of way, for example. And I think that all of that contributes to a look of the setting. The Ape City, I think, is much, much more interesting because had it been done originally, we basically would have gotten skyscrapers with I want to say mannequins and things like that, mannequins that look like humans instead of apes, and all of these other things. I think it's much more interesting to see them with the horses, to see that that their evolution was not parallel to humanity's evolution, and the way that they showed that, was just with little visual touches. But they kept certain bits of Serling's draft, that did work visually. So like the Simian Museum, for example, was something from Serling's script, but it's intermixed with all of this, with all of the horses, and the fact that they didn't have flight at the time, which I think really was an interesting touch, and all these sorts of things, and I think it made a better story and it made a better film visually. So this is really one of those instances where the cost of the budget and the lack of CGI actually helped the script, because it made the world more interesting, it made it look more interesting, it made the world building more complex, and ultimately the end result produced a better film.
Agreed.
That's interesting you say that. And I think if I had to place a human time period on the Ape Society, it's late 19th century.
Yeah, it's very Victorian in a lot of respects. Maybe like close to World War One. And I think it was done deliberately, because they do make some direct references to the Scopes trial from the 1920s.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I think your comments though get us right in, lead right into theme and the differences between the book and the movie. And for me, the reason I prefer the book is just that I prefer both of these, I think, are classic examples of that era 60s science fiction and what the purpose of science fiction was at that time. Even 50s science fiction had the same sort of thing, where everything was some sort of philosophical message, a commentary on society or technology or something in that vein. What I see the big difference is that in this movie, and I think your comments about the budget are fascinating, but it really turned this movie into more a commentary on current society, and it was a cautionary tale about nuclear technology and nuclear weapons and what could possibly happen. Versus the book, I think, was a much, it doesn't take place on Earth, first of all. It actually does take place at Betelgeuse. And I thought it was interesting that Charlton Heston referenced that, because it's a direct Easter egg back to the book. Early in the movie, he talks about what planet they're on. Well, that's the planet they're actually on in the book. But the book is more of a commentary on the fact that all societies evolve along certain lines, and in every society is the seed of their own doom. And then eventually, when they get back to Earth, they found out that the same thing that happened on this planet with human society devolving happened on Earth. And then you find out that there's actually ape societies that are about to fall to humans. So it's like these societies are constantly going through this cycle. So I appreciated that much larger view, but it's a completely different message than what you got here. So it's interesting that this movie is this concept, this story is such a chameleon, because then you have the Marky Mark version, which was really kind of going back to the book. It's not a great film, but the concept was about the book. And then the James Franco version is a cautionary tale about pandemics, and then other things after that. So I wanted to get your guys' general idea, your thoughts on the theme of Planet of the Apes through all the films, but this film in particular, and what you thought of what kind of message they were trying to send. And I'm going to start with Adam. So.
Let's see. I guess for first off, I'm going to have to go read the book, because I just found out there's a book today. Sorry about that. As far as the overall message, I really think it's warning us about the dangers of technology.
Definitely.
And basically, what our society could become.
I think it's interesting. I'm playing Fallout again right now, Fallout 4. And kind of contrasting. It's like, can you imagine a Fallout 4 crossover with Planet of the Apes type thing? But, I digress. Steve,
Yes.
you kicked all this off. What do you think about the concepts in this movie and the differences between the book and the movie, if you've read the book?
I haven't read the movie, but what I can do is I can compare the Serling draft with what we saw in the movie.
Yeah.
I feel like I can do that for you. In terms of the message of the film, I really think that Serling basically said it himself with this line, and I'm not going to get it this exactly right because my memory of it is a little fuzzy, but man brings his idiocy along with his wisdom. And this was a line from Dr. Zaius. And I think
Right.
that's something that he's really trying to get across, is that, humanity is capable of achieving great things, but there is also this death wish that brings upon it. And I think that you definitely see that explored with the character of Taylor, who was Thomas in the original draft. But Taylor talks a lot about, I'm leaving because, man has his folly in him, that he was kind of tired of man, and maybe he kind of saw the darkness to which man is kind of capable of reaching, and he ultimately turns out to be right in the end, because man does destroy itself.
Give me.
What I think is interesting is that the later Planet of the Apes movies that followed this one really went back to the book in a lot of ways. Like the one, I forget which Planet of the Apes it is, but there's one where there's an actual human society where they have enslaved apes. I don't even remember which the name. There's so many of them. I don't remember the name. There's like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, but it's all in a Blu-ray. I actually have it. I haven't seen them all yet though.
Yeah, that movie is actually a direct, almost word for word from what one of the apes in the book describes as why his civilization fell and ape civilization rose in the book. So I think it's fascinating.
I'll get a little bit into this, and it's particularly with the character of Dr. Zaius, because this is kind of like where the flaws of ape society are, and yet you can see that there's a rationality behind it. The whole ape religion is sort of based on the fear of man, and almost like man is the devil in the ape religion. So this is kind of like why they grow past them to a certain extent. The thing of it is that I think the reason that the apes fear man is because they bring all their violence to it. They're afraid of human greed. The greed that kind of pushes it to violence. And in a way, the apes kind of do the same thing to man. Dehumanize man, seeing him as not only a devil but beneath, civilization itself. Treating him as basically like an animal. And so all of this juxtaposition is really kind of interesting because, you have a society that has kind of moved past man, but the consequence of that is that they dehumanize anything that isn't ape. Yeah. And so, how have they really evolved that much? It raises that question, and it never gives you the answer to that. It just shows you what ape society has become, and you kind of take away from what you want from it. But every point that they make about humanity and the foibles of humanity and the self-destructiveness of humanity, and its capacity for war and violence and greed, all of that kind of sticks there. And Taylor tries hard to leave it, and yet he comes back to the same thing, and he never truly escapes as much as he tries to. And I think that that's kind of where Serling is really going in terms of storytelling.
Well, I think the movie does a good job. I think this is where it kind of holds on to the theme of the book, where it's all societies eventually have the same development cycle, and even this ape society is moving in that direction. I think this is one of the things that they tried to do well in the Mark Wahlberg version of the movie. The problem is that they got too hung up on moments in the film, which is, modern films in general, which is we want to give people something cool to look at instead of focusing on the message of the film. Right. The other thing, real quick before I get to Lance, you were talking about the religion. I think that the Planet of the Apes movie is an interesting commentary on religion in general, because their religion has evolved as a way to protect the society. So
Yeah.
not really grounded in any real truth, are seeking truth as far as the metaphysical and the world beyond. It's more about protecting, perpetuating a lie to protect the society that the religion is grounded in. So
It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand they are protecting society from everything bad about man, and they're protecting them from possibly the resurgence of a human society, but at the cost of the fact that they're becoming basically stagnant, because their science is not being allowed to evolve, because they're not allowed to question anything. They're not allowed to question the precepts of the ape religion, which was not part of Sterling Strath, but I think really adds a lot to this universe. And all of this. So because of that, they can never change, they can never grow, because then they can never ask questions. And you have to wonder, though, whether Taylor is making society better by introducing this back in, or if they're setting the seeds for their own destruction, because they're allowing mankind to potentially threaten them. So all of these are really, really interesting questions, and I just love stories that kind of leave these things open-ended and never, tell you what the answer is.
And once again, I think this movie is definitely grounded in its time, in the 60s, because this is what the 60s was all about. It was establishing, it was smashing old systems, old patterns of behavior, and trying to question everything, and some of it worked out well, some of it didn't work out so well, depends on your point of view, but it was definitely a chaotic time of change, and so that's what we got. So Lance, hit us up. Give us your one over the world philosophy as far as Planet of the Apes goes.
Well, looking at the book, Pierre Boulle's book, which is genius, and looking at how humans just regressed. They didn't destroy themselves; they just regressed. Right. And it was the apes taking their place, but only getting as far as where humans began to regress, and that was space travel. So when the book was written, late 50s, early 60s, we just started going into space. So the idea of the apes, that's where they stopped, because in a sense it was a monkey see, monkey do. They mimicked humanity up to that point, and they became stagnant. So the idea is, are they going to regress like what the humans did?
That's an interesting observation.
Because the humans, they made a choice to regress and just stop speaking and play lazy, as the term was in the book. It's pretty cool. And then you get into, of course, the 60s version, which has the morality tale of war, nuclear war, what have you. We basically get the gist that humanity has destroyed itself. They take a pretty good hard stance on it in the 1968 film. They destroyed themselves. And then the apes evolved. And we get to see that in Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from Planet of the Apes, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, Battle for the Planet of the Apes. We get to see all of that play out nicely in a decent series for its time. But when you start to look at like the 60s influence of the 1968 movie, that's where we get our social class structure of the apes. The orangutans as politicians, the orangutans as everything that we kind of don't like in politics. And then you get the chimpanzees, the idealistic hippie scientists that are being oppressed by the military society, which is the apes. Yeah, and the apes, in a sense, are the working class. They're the class structure that's part of the infrastructure. And even the chimpanzees are protesting at one point in Planet of the Apes 68. I mean, it screams of change. It screams of wake up. But the way they use apes as that's the metaphor. It's easier to do that in a science fiction in the 60s than it is to actually have the real races and real class structures doing that in a movie that would be considered probably too political and too dramatic. So you can actually teach good morality by watching, the Planet of the Apes, because it kind of puts it all in a tight nutshell. It's like, okay, here it is. You can't oppress. You can't lie, even if it's religion or science. You got to evolve. And they're not looking at the humanity that destroyed themselves. They really aren't learning anything. You know, they're heading down the same road. The apes are heading down the exact same roads as the humans did. In fact, they're actually heading down earlier because they can see they're already lying. They're already oppressing before they even get to a stage of technology taking over.
Yeah. Well, not only that, even in the movie, I mean, they even hit on the social themes of the current society, you know, the real world society where they, you know, I think Taylor actually says never trust anyone under 30 to Julius at one point, you know, and they're talking about, you know, all the young people wear beards, you know, and, you know, the whole thing, everything from the 60s was in this film. So it's very dated in that time in that way. So.
Right. And it was a push for equality. It was a push for equality, which even Zira, who was oppressed as a woman and a chimpanzee, in a sense, she had two strikes against her. But she was a top scientist trying to get somewhere in psychology. So they got the ideas of it, I think, down pretty pat. And, you know, it's fun. Right. It's fun how they locked it up in a cinematic endeavor versus the novelization, which goes way deeper in social class structures in a way to the point where you learn that the apes actually really control everything because they control the class structure. They pick up your trash. They are the police. They are the military. And in the book it said behind every great orangutan there's an ape. And if the apes revolt, then guess what? Society will crumble. It's the apes that controlled everything in the books.
Well, and I thought it was interesting too because the orangutans control the administrative arms of science as well, you know. So they're the ones that really keep a check on the chimpanzees. So.
Right, it's cool stuff, and the metaphors are there. Even it doesn't matter if it's apes or real people. The moral of the story is still there. But I do like the idea that, I mean, they really made it dramatic cinematically, you know, nuclear war, destruction, versus the book. It was just a natural digression in humans. They just gave up.
Now, before we transition to acting performances, I want to throw this out to everybody for, you know, try and keep the answer short. You know, it doesn't have to be yes, no, but one of the things that we talk about a lot on Sloppy Spoilers, and we've talked about some here as well, is that a lot of modern movies, when they're trying to give us social messages or even political messages, they talk at us instead of talking to us. They preach, you know, and so it's unpalatable because people don't like to be preached at naturally anyway. This film, we've already talked about. The social messages and political messages are most definitely there. This movie's full of it, right? But did you feel like this movie was talking at you or talking to you? And I'm going to go with Lance first, and then I'll go around the horn, Adam, and then Steve.
I definitely think it was not preachy at all. I definitely think you got it through, like, the jadedness of Taylor. I mean, you just get a lot through his sarcasm, and then how he's just smacked in the face when he's captured. You know, I definitely think it's entertainment. I think it's definitely entertainment, but it has nice layered drama underneath to make you think.
Absolutely. Adam, how about you? What did you think of it? Did you think this movie was, you know, to use modern parlance, woke preaching at you, or was it?
No, I did not. I feel it was telling its story, and it was more a morality play. It was more like the moral of the story, the lessons, even the politics in it was woven into the story versus being rammed up my butt and down my throat. And I think that, you know, it didn't have the modernness of, well, we're going to just ram this message down your throat. As there's this, in this, you know, you can see that they're trying to show you, you know, the horrors of the war or the classism for the different versions of apes and monkeys and chimps. You know, as today, I think the message would be you'd be hit over the head with it.
I agree. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I will say that Rod Serling, I would say, is one of the best social commentators in history, perhaps. He's always been somebody who's had his finger on the pulse of the human condition. And the way that he describes it, is usually in terms of entertainment, but it's definitely under the surface where you can see, he has some serious ideas that he's trying to explore, but he never, comes around and hammers it to you. He usually makes you think, and he usually creates a situation where you really kind of understand what he's talking about, but it's not in the case where he's telling you exactly what to think about it. He might give you his opinion, but he's not trying to ram it down your throat. With this movie, what it's really couched in is in terms of a thought experiment. He is putting you in the shoes of Taylor and saying, walk a mile in the shoes of the chimpanzees and ask yourself, if this was being done to you, would you tolerate it? And the answer, of course, is no, because we're seeing it through the eyes of Taylor, who is an everyman character, and he's experiencing all the sorts of things that was happening to animals around that time. Big game hunting was going on, all of that. He's being hunted like a game animal. He's being experimented on in all of these ways that we would find horrific if it was done to a human being. He's being put on trial and not given any rights. All of these things. I mean, you have the Scopes trial basically done in reverse. And all of these sorts of things. But it's never a point where it's saying, look, this is a political commentary. Right. This is what you need to think about it. There's none of that. None of that at all. And actually, one of the things I love is how they use visual gags at times to make its point, but it's never a point where it's distracting. I absolutely love the moment in the film where they have the Scopes trial and you have the three judges side by side, and they do the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil gag, right. And it's just for a moment, but it makes its point. I mean, and that and then it moves on, and you're on with the next part of the film. And it never stops being entertaining at any point. And in fact, I would say it's probably more entertaining in a traditional movie respect than the Serling draft was, because it's not as ponderous. It moves along to the next part, and you get to see this next aspect of ape society and all of these sorts of things. And it also leaves a lot unanswered and a lot for the reader to fill, or the viewer to fill in, on their own, without having to be told, this is what we meant to do with this world. This is what you should think about this. It's like, okay, it's implied that nuclear war destroyed the human society, but they never outright tell you. It's implied that, there was a civilization at this point and there were humans and this thing's happened. But you're left to fill in the gaps with the clues left in the movie. And all of that, I think, is better than the way they do it today, where they tell you exactly what to think. They leave no ambiguity whatsoever, and they leave no room for imagination or individual thought at all. And I would say the way they did it in this movie is the way it should be done.
I absolutely agree, and I think it wasn't just this movie; it was everything. That from that time up to a certain point, and I can't put my finger on when everything started to transition over to more telling rather than making the argument, but it did. But this is something that I see, going back to our comic roots for a second, I see this all the time, and there are various comic creators that I respect from big companies who are so frustrated because their viewers or their readers will tell them, look, I don't want to read your comics anymore because it's full of politics or it's full of social commentary. And they'll say, oh, it always was. And they have a point. Like we're talking about right now, Planet of the Apes had political and social commentary on it. The difference is what we're talking about here. And it really, I think this is one of the most important points that's going to come out of this podcast, is that in the past, creators were making an argument. They were presenting an argument. Arguments make you think. They make you come up with your own counter arguments. They encourage and foster debate, versus what we're getting a lot now is people telling you what to think. And that, that is the natural, if I'm going to be a little philosophical for a moment, the natural state of man is to rebel against authoritarianism. They don't want to be shackled, So,
and that's in this movie.
Yeah.
Never trust anybody over 30.
Exactly. So I think that's really fascinating. So let's go from there and let's get into performances. And let's build up to the big cheese. We'll build up to Charlton Heston. But before we get to Charlton Heston, I want to start. I want to talk about 4 characters or 4 actors in particular. And if there's anybody else that you want to mention, feel free to bring it up at any time. But I wanted to do Maurice Evans, who played Dr. Zaius, Kim Hunter, who played Zira, Roddy McDowall, who played what was his name?
Cornelius.
And then obviously Charlton Heston, who plays Taylor. So I'm going to start with Maurice Evans as Dr. Zaius. And I want to start off with Steve. Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about his performance, what you thought about his performance? And then, feel free, like I said, anybody, if you want to bring up anybody else's performance, go ahead and bring it up. So.
Yeah, I get. Well, are we focusing mainly on Dr. Zaius right now, or?
Dr. Zaius and the rest of the cast. So
okay, I'll focus on those 4 then. Yeah, Dr. Zaius. I will say, particularly for the first 3 that we're talking about, it should be noted that they are working with prosthetics. We don't actually get to see their face. All of their movements are done probably with a little bit of animatronics. I mean, we see mouths move and things like that. On the mask that they're wearing, the ape mask that they're wearing. So I will say that the actors do a really, really good job of selling these characters, even through the masks, the animatronics, and all of those sorts of things. A lot of it is through the vocal work. A lot of it is through the physical movements. I thought that Evans did a really, really good job, particular. His voice really carries. He has the authority that a character like that needs to have. Because Dr. Zaius really is the voice of authority and traditionalism. Okay, that is what he represents. And so, getting this guy with this, hard British accent, really kind of sells the point that, yeah, this guy is the person who is sort of representing everything wrong with this society. He is a character who is backwards. He is blind willfully. He knows what's really going on and chooses not to tell them, because to him it's more important to preserve order within the society. And he's a very compelling villain, and not just in terms of the writing, but the way that Evans plays him. Every time he shows up, you really don't like him. He is a very, very not likable character, but he's not likable in a love to hate him sort of way. And a lot of that is in the performance. I mean, he comes in and he makes an impression. So yeah, kudos to him for that. McDowell is a really good actor, and he's done stuff for Serling before, both in Twilight Zone and Night Gallery. I felt like the actor was kind of buried in the role in this one, where if you don't know that it's Roddy McDowell, you probably won't even think that it's him. And that actually is a testament to him. Because really his character is somebody who is like, okay, I know what the truth is, but I'm afraid to say it because I don't want to, destroy the cushy life that I built for myself and my wife. And I think he plays that well. I mean, you can hear the timidness in the voice, you can hear that, this is a guy who's very afraid, to say anything controversial, because he feels that if he speaks out, that he's basically going to destroy the life that he's built. So all of that is there, but you also see his character growth through the course of the film, and McDowell gradually plays that. He starts getting a little bit bolder over time. He starts saying things that he wouldn't necessarily say to Dr. Zaius. He still has a little bit of that respectiveness, and he's still a little timid at times. But you can kind of hear, at least in the vocal performance, where that goes. The one consistent character I would say is Zira. I think that Kim Thomas did a really, really great job on this character. She comes in, she has also, I think a lot of it is projection through the voice, not a lot of it through the tone of voice. And you can sort of see her reactions to Taylor. You can hear that she has a certain amount of compassion for Taylor and his position, more so than the other apes. And she's a very likable character in contrast, not just because of what the character does, but because of the way that she carries herself. And that really, I think, comes through with that. But I would say that definitely the star of the show is Charlton Heston. And a lot of it is because he's such a charismatic actor.
Let's save Charlton Heston for his
Okay.
own. But
Okay.
one of the things I will say real quick on Kim Hunter before I go to Lance
Yeah, I kept forgetting her name.
is Kim Hunter. I think her performance was very physical.
Yeah.
She does a lot of motion with her hands that really brings out the emotion of the character, especially during the trial scene where she's arguing on behalf of Taylor. And you could definitely see her experience there. I will say for myself, real quick, before I get to Lance as well, Roddy McDowall, that voice to me is iconic. I could never not know it's not Roddy McDowall in anything he's doing, voice acting, all that stuff. And then Dr. Zayas, I was surprised. I looked at a lot of these actors preparing for this podcast, not only Dr. Zayas, but the other orangutans. They're all actors I knew from TV shows. Dr. Zayas was in a ton of Shakespearean stuff.
He sounds like a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah.
And I loved him in, Macbeth, Richard II, Hamlet. And he was in Dial M for Murder,
Okay, yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So he was really just a very famous, incredible actor, and to see him bring that to that part. So, Lance, go ahead. And if you could talk about, anybody you want, but definitely talk about Roddy McDowall, Kim Hunter, and Maurice Evans.
Well, Maurice Evans, a fitting replacement for Edward G. Robinson, I will say, nailed it. The entire cast nailed it. And it is a situation where you go big or you go home. I mean, especially with a movie like this. And how a theatrical actor like Maurice Evans now had to actually, he didn't have to adjust much from theater to playing Dr. Zayas because the animation was there. You can see the animation. Kim Hunter, she's the school of method, theoretically. You look at A Streetcar Named Desire. You look at these movies theatrically, she's big. Mm-hmm. So I think they were the fitting choices, Roddy McDowall as well, to put prosthetics on because they had a bigness about them that they can animate with their hands and their eyes and their voice. So that sold it big time. It was like, okay, John Chambers, his makeup, of course, was still a little solid back then. He was the first guy to win an Academy Award for Best Makeup in a category that didn't exist. This was unprecedented for its time. And that says something with these performers having to wear that in the heat in California and still get a performance out of them. That's an amazing achievement. But I think the animation is what sold it. They went big. And their theater roots helped that. Because now you got to be able to emote under that prosthetics, which worked. And it's always surprising to me, too, when you really look at it in retrospect, how they built the franchise around Roddy McDowall. He wasn't in Beneath the Planet of the Apes because he was off directing something, but he carried the rest of that franchise, whether he was Cornelius or Caesar. He carried it. And as the makeup got better, his performance showed more, his anger, his hate towards man when he became Caesar later on in the franchise. He nailed it. He nailed it over and over again. And you can't imagine, the movie without that particular cast, even with prosthetics on their faces. I can't imagine that.
And once again, Roddy McDowall, I will say the first things that I remember Roddy McDowall from was, I think it was the Lord of the Rings animated stuff that he did, the Return of the King and stuff. But the second thing I remember him from was he played in the theatrical version of Camelot, another theater actor. He played Mordred. And you see that his ability to physically play emotions and evil sometime in his performance as Caesar later on. So
he nails it. And of those three, I do have to give a pretty good, strong shout out to Linda Harrison. Although it was Zanuck's girlfriend, and it was as a form of nepotism that she was cast as the lead female. She nailed it without having to say a word. Just a presence. So once again, it was like, oh, that was a happy surprise, accident, whatever you want to call it back then, because she was cast. It was the studio boss cast his girlfriend, but nailed it, sold it. And it's like, wow, she, to me, not only is iconic as Nova, but she is like one of the premier 60s babes. I mean, Raquel Welch, Linda Harrison. I mean, you look at just those two icons alone, and it's staggering. It's like, wow, this gal makes an impression just by being present, not by having to say much. You can see it through pantomime, basically. And it nailed it. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. That is acting. All around, great choices. I know they went through their follies about who to cast and who was going to bow out and who they wanted, but ultimately, I think they got the perfect cast.
Real quick interjecting on my part before I go to Adam. Once again, we've said it already, but descriptive audio would have been so helpful to help the visually impaired appreciate the performance of Linda Harrison, and others.
That's one of the things I was going to bring up.
Okay.
I think that audio descriptors would have really helped me enjoy the performances from these actors.
Yeah, because
you did an incredible job with talking through prosthetics and masks.
Because the majority of the humans are mute, so they don't talk. The other thing I'll say is that Dr. Zaius' performance, going back to Steve's point, he is the villain of the film. However, from his point of view, and I think this is what makes him a great villain, he's doing what he needs to do to protect his society.
Yeah.
He's doing what he thinks he needs to do to protect his people because he understands that this truth would probably shatter them, So from that point of view, I'm going all Obi-Wan Kenobi. From a certain point of view,
Good as a point of view, Anakin.
Yeah. So I think that's very interesting, and I love that about him. And I think Maurice Evans brings that out. He brings that gravitas. He brings that authority. He brings that what do you call it? That wisdom.
It's charisma. It's charisma.
But from a character standpoint,
stage presence,
there's something to be said about when you get older. You have certain fears when you're young, and they're different than the fears when you get older, because the fears when you get older, you start to worry more about larger things, about protecting society, and you become more cautious. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here is never trust anyone over 30. Well, there's that always that God, I'm blanking out. That battle of wills between the young who want change and the old who understand that too much change too fast or changing certain things is going to cause disaster. And you have where those two meet is where you have the turmoil in society. And I think that's interesting. And, it's definitely, I think it's interesting from a whole bunch of different perspectives, but getting older myself, you're not the same person at 50 that you were at 20. It just doesn't happen. So, it's a fascinating thing. You find yourself thinking things that you never thought you would think at all when you were 20 and idealistic. So it's a fascinating contrast. And, I've got a son who's 22 now, and it's interesting talking to him because I see a lot of me and him when I was that age and how you have different priorities and things. So I think that's a fascinating blend of what's going on there. And I think you see that, in Zaius and then Sierra, and then Cornelius to a certain aspect, and then Sierra's nephew, which is Julius, So I think that's an interesting thing
Lucius.
there. Yeah,
Lucius.
Julius was the
guy with a hose.
Yeah. The zookeeper. Okay.
The angry zookeeper.
Okay.
It's a madhouse.
Adam, what are your thoughts on the performances here? We're going to leave Charlton Heston, and I'll get to you first on Charlton Heston, but talk about the whole cast, if you have anybody else you want to talk about, but specifically Roddy McDowall, who played Cornelius.
Actually, it is cool to go back and watch Roddy McDowell when he was not reading an audiobook.
Yeah.
Because there are a couple of audiobooks that, I know his voice from very well.
I love Roddy McDowell's voice, by the way. I think it's just iconic.
Yes. For anyone who wants to know, I believe he was also the Mad Hatter in Batman the Animated Series.
Yep.
So his performance as Cornelius is always just brings a smile to my face. But like I was saying before, the fact that all the dialogues being done for those prosthetics and those masks is just, it's a work of beauty. And you can see that it's very method acted to the point where they just really, really just become the role. Where you can tell that, this is something that's larger than life, and it shows. And that's what I think brings the beauty in the performances, the over-the-top cheesiness of it. Where, yes, is it dated? Hell yeah. But there's something beautiful in that. Looking now the reason I was chuckling is now that I am pushing 50, wow, what happened to the 27-year-old kid who threw caution to the wind? Now that I'm just more protective and more, taking those risks that I used to take in my 20s, I'm no longer taking in my late 40s. And it's about the bigger picture now. Because I really don't think there are, Cornelius and the other apes, they don't see themselves as the villains. They're seeing themselves being the protectors of their society. And the greatest villains of all are the villains that don't see themselves as the villain.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's really interesting what you get is you get that contrast. And, without getting too much into moral relativism, sometimes you have to ask yourself, are there any, we are not going to answer this question on this podcast, but are there any absolute truths? Is there absolute morality of right and wrong, here? I don't know,
That's right. Maybe I'll answer that question.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to a discussion we had, behind the scenes about writing and what is a true villain. Mm-hmm. Do I see Dr. Zaius as the villain? It's interesting because he's a paradox, and you see he struggles with it. He just makes a choice. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, to me, is he really a villain? I think it was written well enough so that I can ask that question. Is he really a villain, or is he just doing what he has to do? Because, he's not, in the grand scheme of things, he's not doing anything extremely horrible, like Shaden was saying, experiments, what we think would be horrific, but it's being done to a human. But we got to take the perspective of it. He knows what humanity is. And at that point, is what he doing really, is it really wrong? It isn't, according to Ape Society. So I like that. It's well written when you have to unfold the layers of a character that's that deep. We don't have that today. It's white hat, black hat, shoot 'em up. You know what I mean? They may get rid of the guy in the black hat, but they may need him for the next 5 sequels. So lock him up for a while and rehash. Whereas, Planet of the Apes was supposed to end. Wasn't supposed to go on for another 5 movies. Yeah. It was designed to end. But that's Hollywood.
Like I said, we're not going to solve the philosophical question, one of the great philosophical questions on this podcast, but there are very few instances of people, either fictional or real, where you could definitively say that they are absolutely evil, absolutely the villain. There are a couple, and I won't name them right out. But even people like
Joffrey.
yeah, you look at like Genghis Khan. To Europe, Genghis Khan is Eastern Europe. He's a villain. But you go to Mongolia, Genghis Khan is worshipped there. He's a hero. So depends on
Vlad the Impaler as well.
Yeah.
Right, Dracula. I mean, to me, he's a true supervillain.
Yeah.
And then literally, and then of course over time they changed him into the sympathetic anti-hero and what have you. They made him pretty and romantic. And it's like, no, he is the ultimate supervillain. You want to study supervillains, read Dracula. Because Dracula is the supervillain.
And he's worshipped in Romania, so
yeah, and he's worshipped in Romania, and it's just it's perspective.
Excuse me, but to bring it into reality, you go in certain parts of Chicago, Al Capone is worshipped as a hero because, yes, he did kill cops and, was a murdering psychopath, but he also made sure that there were soup kitchens for the elderly and that the poor were well taken care of under his direction too.
And
I guess it's your definition of, what can you get away with and sleep with at night?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
I think it's kind of a reflection of our society, where our society has become polarized and dogmatic. But I don't want to make us into that podcast, at least not yet. So so let's hit the big cheese here. Let's hit not to take anything away from everybody else, but you ask anybody about Planet of the Apes 1968, they immediately go and flash to Charlton Heston and his classic lines from the movie and his performance. So I'm going to start with Adam. I'll go ahead and interject here and there, but Adam.
Charlton Heston has the most quotable lines from this movie, where they've been parodied to death. You damn dirty apes!
Yeah, and they've been parodying everything from Futurama to
Jason Bob Strikes Back.
Yep.
Simpsons.
Yeah,
it's one of the few things Family Guy is not parodied for some weird reason.
Spaceballs had, so.
Yeah, it's hard not to think of this movie without Charlton Heston, and especially the quotable lines.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the way he delivered them as well. I think what is interesting to me, and what I really want to hear, from you guys, is that this style of acting, I said before we came on, is he almost Shatnered it, because it is so big. It is so, I'm not going to say in your face, but it's just delivered with such, to use Lance's term, charisma. And
it's eaten. He just chews it up and spits it out.
Yeah, and
to a point where it's like, I can watch this movie in 5 minutes, just start quoting it and making fun of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from theater, because when you act, in theater versus acting in film, a lot of times theater you have to project to the last person, the highest, the last person, the last audience member. Everyone needs to be able to get your performance, so it's much bigger, it's much louder. You have to project your voice, you have to make your movements more exaggerated, because the guy who only could afford the $5 seat, 500 feet from the stage needs to be able to see what you're doing, versus a film, they're right in on you. So I think that's part of what was going on, but it comes off, for better or worse, to modern audiences. I think a lot of times it comes off as campy, as hokey to a certain extent. So I'm going to kick it over to Steve Shadewing. I'm going to finish up with Lance. What are your thoughts on all that and on Charlton Heston's performance?
Oh, it's outstanding. I think I mentioned before that Charlton Heston could read the phone book and it would be entertaining. I mean, that's how good he is here. It is absolutely that he's a charismatic actor and he has presence. I don't think that he could do these over-the-top lines if he didn't have the charisma to back it up. It's the same reason Shatner gets away with it, or at least Shatner got away with it when he was younger, is because he had the charisma where, he can do these kinds of ridiculous takes and yet he's convincing because of the way that he pulls it off. He's earnest about it. You can see the sincerity in the way that he delivers his lines, and you believe in the character, and because you believe in the character, you believe in the performance. I mean, but not many actors can do that. Not many actors have the sheer presence, where they can get away with that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think Heston completely gets away with this, and not only that, he's got some pretty good lines that he's given, and he makes them epic because of the way he performs them. Some of these were actually additions from Michael Wilson in his draft. The whole "get your stinking hands off me, you damn dirty ape." And a lot of that is just the absolute way that he hams it up. It's a madhouse. I mean, in and of itself, it could have been a completely forgettable line, but because he screams it out, at the top of his lungs, getting hit by that fire hose, it's funny, and it's entertaining, and you love to see it. And I would say the reason that the twist is so memorable is because Heston's last line is delivered the same way. God damn you all to hell!
Yeah.
It's just such a great delivery, and you hear the pain in his voice as he realized what humanity has done to itself. He's realized that oh yeah, I never left Earth, and all of this, and but it's Heston who makes it all work, and he anchors this film completely, and it's just a great performance. Yeah, it's hammed up to the nth degree, but it's fun, and that's really what a lot of these movies are missing. These fun character actors, who can pull all of these kinds of Shatner like over the top performances and just ham it up, and you just kind of laugh with it.
I think it's interesting you said that though, because he doesn't do that in all of his films. Like you look at some of his other stuff, like one of my favorite films, Ben-Hur. He's not acting like that, So it was definitely something he brought to this film. Also, what you said about the phone book, I think is hilarious, because every time you say that, I flash back to the scene he's in. Can't believe he's in this movie as well until you just maybe think of it. Wayne's World.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could we get a better actor in here? And then they put in Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
Really? I haven't seen Wayne's World in a very long time. So
Wayne's World 2. That was Wayne's World 2.
Yeah. So yeah, they have the guy, and he's telling the story about the girl that he left behind, and they're all bored. They're like, here we go. And then they bring Charlton Heston, and it brings Wayne to tears. And
and it sells it. It's like
awesome. So I'm gonna have to watch that tonight. That's awesome sauce.
Yeah. It was hilarious. It was really good. And to be honest with you, Charlton Heston killed it. Yeah, absolutely.
He killed it.
Yeah, because you listen to him give the same exact lines, you're like, oh my God, So Lance, hit us up on Charlton Heston.
He sells it. I mean, you look at, you've already called out Ben-Hur. I mean, he was already Ben-Hur. He was already Moses. He was already El Cid. The list goes on. So it's like, okay, this is the right guy to do this. And when you see how subdued his performance is when they're in Lake Powell, the whole time he's just needling Landon, with quiet sarcasm. And before he gets big, you know what I mean? To me, that's acting, because it's like, okay, you guys don't know if you're the only people on the planet, but you're going to ride this guy, the only other colleague you think you may have in the world, and you're going to give him a hard time about morality, about longevity, immortality. And he's selling it quietly until he gets captured by the apes, and then he starts to go a little crazy, and you can see this. And of course, the physical acting, when he first sees an ape and you have those horns going off in the soundtrack, it's reactionary. It's like, okay, that's performing. Don't need to see anything there. Don't need no extra dialogue. It's just acting. His stature, everything about him, it fits. It looks like he can hold his own. It looks like, if he can make it, this is the guy to make it, as jaded and angry as he is. And you can see that character arc through the movie. It's big, and you always wish you had more of this today in certain performances, but I don't think the storytelling is there to give this kind of meat to the proper actor. That's the difference. You have that source material to go off as a director and a performer, man. Like Adam said, you chew it up, you spit it out. That's living the dream to be able to do something like that. That is absolutely living the dream. And when you pull it off, you clap about it. I mean, think about how the movie ends. His big performance, credits, The Sound of the Ocean, no soundtrack. What a downer, man. You know what I mean? What a big downer. But he sells it. And people walk away, thinking, scratching their heads, wow, that really sucks. Because he sells it. And to have to play off, people in prosthetics, I mean, I can't imagine how difficult that was back then to be able to have conversations and try to sell it. It's buyable. And if you buy it, you win. Something happened. It just worked. But you got to have the right people to be able to pull that off. I mean, if they were going to do this today again and redo it, they might put in like Will Ferrell or something. You know what I mean? Because they don't want it to be dramatic. They'll go the opposite way to try to get a laugh out of something that's like, well, wait a second. Think about if you were in the theater in 1968. You know what I mean? That's a different kind of audience. And we always get to, does it translate today? We'll get to that. But Charlton Heston is big, and he is an excellent actor. I mean, even in its most subtle, Touch of Evil. All the Westerns. Remember the movie? Did anybody ever see the movie Motherlode?
No.
Where he plays the crazy miner that's protecting his claim and the modern mountains of like Portland or I think it was or the state of Washington, and they find his find and he's killing people to protect his. I mean, he's an old man already, but he sells it. It's like, okay, he's getting older and older. But even in True Lies, he can be Arnold Schwarzenegger's boss because it sells. You know what I mean? He's that big. And I'm like, all right, we do not have that today. That's gone. That's Hollywood lore. And this is a movie that solidifies that. Not even talking about Ten Commandments, not even talking about Ben-Hur, El Cid, the Conqueror, all that stuff. Not even talking about any of that. It's Charlton Heston. That's it.
I think we're talking. What you basically summed up there is the ability to give powerful command performances.
Yeah.
And that is. I don't even think that's in demand in today's Hollywood, to be honest with you.
Mm.
So I think that translates quite nicely into how does this movie translate to modern audiences? And to me, as we've been talking, my thoughts on this movie have definitely have gone in different directions, have evolved on a few things. But I think what we really hit on here for me with modern audience, and how this would translate to modern audiences is that this is wait for the play. This is a character-driven and actor-driven, actress-driven film. They are the ones that drive this movie forward. And I think that what modern audiences probably would struggle with this version of Planet of the Apes is that too often in modern films, actors and actresses make up, they make the difference, or they make up the difference of what's going on. So the movie is supposed to be, the visuals drive the film, the soundtrack drives the film, the whatever song that they license to put in the movie drives the film, So Zack Snyder is a perfect, I hate to pick on Zack Snyder, but he's a perfect example of this, where, he licenses some song and then it gives us a bunch of really great visuals, and then the acting performances and the story suffer for it, because we're given, and I hate to pick on it, but we're given visual and audio diarrhea to overwhelm the message of what's supposed to be going on. And I think that it would be a struggle for a lot of modern audiences to be able to appreciate a film that is so driven by story and so driven by the actors themselves and their performances. And I think that's the real difference. And there are some films, I think, science fiction films that rely on the actor, but even then, I think of some of like Edge of Tomorrow or Oblivion, or Minority Report. Those are all Tom Cruise movies. But even then, they don't rely solely on the actor because they got to give us a bunch of visuals and cool CGI and graphics and everything. And I think that filmmakers have become over reliant on that. Even films that we don't think should have that in it, or we don't realize it, are CGI now. So it's interesting, you know. And I think it has its place, but I think more modern filmmakers need to go back and look at the old stuff to understand what they have cut out of movies and deprive the audiences of. So that's my little spiel. Let's go around. I'm going to start with Lance and come around the horn again up to Steve. So I'll go Lance, Adam, and then Shadewing. How your thoughts on this movie for modern audiences as a whole?
I think this is one of the rare movies because I'm going to use the term novelty, and I shouldn't, but I can't. I don't know how to equate it any other way at this point for a modern audience. But I think a modern audience will give it the time of day because it is iconic enough, and because it's still perpetuating today. I think that's despite how poorly I believe it's being done today. I think people want to see that source material. Just the same way someone may want to watch the 1931 Frankenstein. To say, okay, this is in a sense cinematically where it all began. And then, of course, the correlation with the marketing tie-ins of how this movie started it. Once again, it wasn't Star Wars. It was Planet of the Apes. This started it. This started that whole rethinking process of what a studio can do with a movie upon its release. All the tie-ins, all the marketing. How much more can we milk out of this movie besides just the movie itself? So it's cinema greatness. It is a novelty now, but it's poignant because it's a case study, not only cinematically, but business-wise, studio-wise. In a sense, this is what everybody's trying to achieve. Make that one movie so you can milk it for the next 30 years. I mean, basically, unfortunately, that is the modus operandi for most things today, as we've seen. So I think there are many elements that'll help it today for a modern audience, and may even get them to watch, the rest of the series, which is decently written. I don't think this movie's going to die anytime soon, which is great. That is something that I am happy about. Of course, can people achieve something like this with proper care and time? Yes, you let the story and your characters propel the movie along. It's not about the next action sequence. It's not about the next sight gag. And believe me, I see it at its smallest level now. Even, you go to certain festivals and stuff, and you have movies that are playing, and it could be very one note. A guy walks into a bar, fights everybody off. That's the end of it. It's like, so that's the movie? I just seen 3 other movies like that,
And I think that it's not necessarily the technology or the modern, filmmaking process that's killing it. It's the choices the actors and directors, because, you look at comic book movies, look at Thor. Anthony Hopkins' performance as Odin is powerful. He, especially in the first one, he brings it. But I will say, look at who directed the first movie and where his experience is. And Kenneth Branagh directed the first movie, and he's a Shakespearean actor, and he brought that to that film, and that's one of the reasons I like that first Thor film so much.
Well, it's the idea once again of charisma.
Yeah.
And it may happen again, but it's going to take a little bit of searching. I think there's a way to kind of get back to it, but it all boils down to the writing. It isn't about the gags, the special effects, the violence. It's about the story. You give a good performer that, they're going to give you something that you're not going to expect. And when that happens, believe me, it's very refreshing. It's very refreshing.
Absolutely. Adam, what do you think about how this movie translates to modern audiences?
I think the way that this translates to modern audiences is being able to appreciate a good story, which I wonder at some points today. The way that everything is so spoon-fed today, and the way that we have a shorter attention span today. You know, the, this that I think this has been attempted to remake this movie a lot of times over the years, and it just doesn't hold those, whether it be the Marky Mark or whether it be the James Franco versions, that they don't hold candle to this. And the thing I really appreciate about this movie the most is it is a morality play, but it doesn't hit you over the head with what it's trying to, the message it's trying to give. It's the performances are well acted and it's over the top, but it's an over the top that you can be thoroughly entertained with, throughout. Once again, Hollywood, audio description, please. That would be appreciated. But it's really, I think that the original version of this from the '68, it's the story. It's the story that drives everything, which is just amazing.
Absolutely. And I think it makes you think, and I think movies that science fiction should make you think and entertain you at the same time. And I think maybe right now the scales are tipped too far in the entertainment category and not enough in the challenge you to think about something category as well. So, Steve, what do you think?
I think a lot of it comes down to the story as well. I'm in agreement with Adam on that. I will say one of the things about this movie is that it really has kept its relevance over the years. Because the problems that it's criticizing are still there. Those have not gone away. And also the story is written in such a way that doesn't date it. So they're not like a lot of obvious anachronisms. This guy could have gone forward 2,000 years from today. And I don't think it changes that much, aside from maybe like some of the special effects. Because basically, the story is just about, a lot of it is role reversal. It's about a future where there's a new dominant species, and you're forced to live under them like animals live under us. That has not changed. I mean, we still do animal experimentations. I mean, we still do hunting, although that has become less socially acceptable than it has in the past. All the things that Serling was talking about are still relevant to some degree, even if some of it has changed. And so I think that because of that, Planet of the Apes stays relevant. It is still every bit as important as it was then. And I think the decision to change the setting of the Ape City, to something more fantasy-like, I guess would be the proper term, also helps it because now it's not, keeping in date with the 1960s. It's its own world. It's its own setting now. And so that doesn't change. So this is one of those rare science fiction films that really has not aged that badly.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of the reason. And I think Adam also hit on this. It's like, which version of Planet of the Apes do people remember? Which one has all of the iconic lines? Which one has all of the iconic scenes? Which one do we constantly quote all the time? It's this version. Nobody brings up the later versions at all.
Right. I couldn't think of a line from any of the other versions.
Exactly. You can't. Because they're not that good. And it's because these things are pale shadows. Some of them are successful. I'm not going to take that away from them. Some of them were perfectly successful, but none of them have the power behind it that this movie has. And it's because of Rod Serling, and it's because of Michael Wilson, and it's because of this director. They put together such a great film between all of them that it has survived and will continue to, I think, long after the others are forgotten.
Absolutely.
I think some of those other Planet of the Apes movies were entertaining, but they're not as memorable.
Yeah.
So,
they're not as smart.
The last thing I'll say, as far as modern audiences, is I wanted to go back and for modern audiences for the makeup. You look at it now, compared to modern prosthetics, and makeup and special effects and everything, and it looks kind of ridiculous. But I'll put this image in everyone's head. There are lots of forms of theater, specifically Greek theater, Japanese theater, where the performer performs behind a mask. And I kind of look at the ape prosthetics as that type of performance. It's a mask. And it forces you as a performer to do different things. You use your voice, use your body to perform and send the message of what you're doing. And I think it's really interesting because what we were talking about with Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter and Maurice Evans and the rest of the cast, they had to do that, and maybe that's something, maybe that is an exercise that needs to be done more in acting schools or acting troupes, where they learn to perform without the benefit of their face and facial expressions and things like that. It forces you to emote in other ways. But that's where it really came to me. You watch Greek tragedies where they actually perform, in the old manner where they're wearing the mask and things like that, or kabuki theater. It's really interesting. So.
Yeah, and one thing though I will go back to is tying into that merchandising. Me as a kid having that Mego Cornelius, you know what I mean, and destroying it because in those days, you played with your toys. You're out, we're out in the desert, I mean, to have those Migos and the Zeus and going out to Halloween and having the mask, the ape mask with the little plastic suit. I mean, that was so huge in the 70s, man, because the series was still going on. And then they had the television series, which was pretty lame for like one season, but then the cartoon came out and that just changed everything again. So it's like this thing that kept going. And, to be the hero, Cornelius or Caesar, I mean, it was a different time, but that does translate now to today because they were the originators of that. Everybody's got their Darth Vader or whatever figures, your Yodas. But remember, boom, it was sexy to have your little, your Cornelius Mego and be out there with your friends. And they have the little carriages that you can put the Mego figures in. The posters, I had a Planet of the Apes poster. I mean, look at the concept posters for it. It's just not these still shots of faces and the models, that you see over and over again. It's drawn. It's not a screen capture. The art sells the movie. All these tie-ins were amazing.
Excuse me. There's also a Marvel. Bringing it back to our comic book roots.
Yeah, there was the
There's
Marvel.
also a really excellent Marvel series too, which had some Power Records adaptations as well.
Right. And all of that was so huge in the day. And to think that one movie spawned all that, spawned the modern, in a sense, they say Jaws was the first blockbuster that kind of ruined the industry. But in my mind, Planet of the Apes was like the first, 20th century blockbuster that tied in so much of a money-making machine. It's a model that everybody still tries to emulate. And
mine growing up was always Star Trek, so that's interesting. So
yeah, and you can see the parallels of that. Mm-hmm. But it's just one of those things too that it's sad that in a sense that it's the originator, but how bad it has spun out of control. What do you need? What do people need in their Happy Meals? Do they need a little Yoda? Okay, whatever. If you got that, I guess that makes your burger taste better. But it's a whole new era. Well, I agree. I don't need that stuff.
It's kind of what we were talking about before, where the general theme of this movie, where the apes are mimicking. Well, the people that come after mimic the stuff, and the mimicry is usually not as good as the original, and it devolves from there. So, but once again, that's a whole philosophical discussion. So,
right, the de-evolvement.
Yeah, let's get right into ratings and let's wrap this bad boy up because we got a little long, but I think this has been a great podcast, great discussion. So, ratings out of 10 for the film. I am going to start with Steve this time and come back around to Lance. So, Steve, what would you rate this movie out of 10?
I think I would probably today give it about a 9 out of 10. It really is a really good movie. I don't think that it's aged as well as I remember. There are like a couple of things that I don't remember having. I didn't remember that I didn't think about. The whole business with them, with the astronauts going into the lake and nobody washing their clothes is kind of dumb. Things like that. But aside from little nitpicks, it's just really, really great, and it's a movie that resonates. It's a movie that still holds up. It aged extremely well. Charlton Heston is amazing. All of these actors that are in this are really, really good. Especially good when you're considering they're all wearing prosthetics. It's one of Rod Serling's most memorable scripts. I just can't take too much away from that. I really, really love it.
Cool. So 9. Adam, what would you rate this movie out of 10?
I'm going to give it a 7, and only because of the blindness doctor. Really inhibits my enjoyment of it. But everything else is just, it's always a fun movie to watch. And, like I said, it doesn't get better than Charlton Heston, especially at the end.
Cool. Lance?
I'll give this movie a definite hard 8. I mean, it's solid. This movie's going to last a long time.
Cool. That's exactly where I'm at with the movie as well. When I was a kid, I would have put this movie like 9.5. Over time, and it's gone down a little bit, but I still think it's really a solid movie, and I would give it an 8 as well, which really, once again, puts us right in line as far as the average, right with the IMDb score, which is an 8.
Wow.
I think it's interesting. Like Steve was saying, there are a few things, like the opening scene where they're crashing in their ship. That is so 60s, but when I'm looking at it now, I'm just seeing this camera turn upside down and everything, because that's probably all they had the budget to do. So, also, we didn't talk about her because she's not in very long, but that lady who played Evans, did she have any lines, or was her whole point was just to sit in there and then die? So, I wonder if she had any lines in the script, or if they just brought her in for one day to sleep and then be dead. So,
yeah, that was in the original Sterling script, and in fact, it was a male character originally. They gender swapped her, but I think that it actually made the character more relevant that way.
Yeah.
Right. Good discussions later on when they're stranded.
Yeah, interesting. All right. So that has been our pod, Cinema Crusaders, talking about Planet of the Apes 1968. Before we sign off, I do want to tell everybody that we have already decided on 2 weeks from now, we are going to cover a movie that is very relevant to what is going on in our world now. It's a classic. I think it is a science fiction staple. I think you need to watch this film for a lot of reasons. And that is the great movie 12 Monkeys, starring Brad Pitt and
Bruce Willis.
Yeah, Bruce Willis. And who is the
Madeline Stowe?
Stowe.
I don't know why I blanked on those, because I think it's just a wonderful film. I can't wait to talk about it. And the parallels to what's going on in real life are scary. They're very eerie. So I think it's going to be a great discussion. So I want to thank my co-host, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This has been a fun discussion. Enjoy revisiting a classic, and now I want to see the original 60 sequels.
Cool.
They're awesome.
Yeah, I want to check it out too, because there's several that I really love, especially the one with the another one that's become a staple in science fiction. It's in games and everything, which is they're worshiping the nuclear missile.
Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Yep, you have that Fallout 4 and Fallout. You have that. It's in Futurama. It's in all sorts of science fiction. And Futurama stole so much from Planet of the Apes. It's not even funny. But
right.
Adam, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Actually, I want to apologize for any background noise and our distractions today. And I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of the dais, and And I love you guys very much, and I can't wait for 2 weeks from now. And let's hope we don't get kicked off of YouTube because of it.
No worries. And
Yeah.
and we work through it. We're professionals, so we try and be professional anyway.
Oh yeah, man.
we pretend to be professionals on YouTube. So
Cool.
Like everybody else.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks so much, Lance.
I'm stealing that.
Thanks for joining us here today, Lance.
Hey, it was awesome. I'm glad I didn't miss this. You know, all we needed were spacesuits. That would have made it better.
We could trek out here, out to California, and we'll film our own Cinema Crusaders version of Planet of the Apes sometime.
Yeah, let's do it in the fall.
Yeah.
It's been a couple more months.
Yeah.
A little cooler.
Yep.
All right. On behalf of all my co-hosts and myself and Comic Crusaders and Cinema Crusaders, I want to say thank you for watching this podcast, and we will talk to all of you later. We're out.
See ya.